Okay, good evening, commissioners and public. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting. And let's start with roll call.
Excuse me. Commissioner Meyer is absent. Commissioner Benson?
Here.
Commissioner Freitas?
Here.
Commissioner Kraft?
Here.
And Commissioner Lazar?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have quorum, and I'm always sorry to see the chair, Commissioner Mayer, not present, and so you all have to put up with me tonight. Could I ask Commissioner Lazar to do the salute to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. And we move right to item C, which is approval of minutes of the last meeting, the June 12th meeting.
Okay. Let me just pull them up on my phone.
Commissioner Lazar has some corrections to that. Thanks.
Just
for
minor,
reviewing
but
them.
let me see here. One was one of the speakers on. Let me see if I can find it here. I think it's under. Yeah, so under public hearings E1, they list the speakers, and the last one, Carla Marino, is Carly Marino, Carly, and then Marino like the bar in Arcata. That's no longer there. Okay, and the next one was on page. Well, it was under. I guess it was just above F, public hearings, in the motion. At the top of the page, it says, due to the conflicting policies in the general plan. I think that meant to be a conflict with the policies in the general plan, the reason for the motion to deny. So that would be my recommendation, that they make that correction.
One more time.
So instead of due to the conflicting policies in the general plan, it would read due to conflict with policies in the general plan. And that was all that I noticed. I'll make a motion to approve as revised if my fellow commissioners.
Okay, good. Thank you, Commissioner Lazar, for reviewing those minutes and finding those small items. And thank you for putting the new ones in for next time. Any other comments on the agenda? I'd like to hear a motion then to.
You moved, I seconded.
Oh, I missed that already. Okay, look how fast they are. Okay, we have a motion and a second, so let's go ahead and roll call. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Motion carries. Okay, this is item D, oral communications. Would the commissioners like to address the public or the commission on any subject not appearing on the agenda? And then this is the general public, right? Okay, and I'd also like to invite anyone who's from the general public, either online or in the chambers, to comment on any item that's not on tonight's agenda. If you've come to speak to an item on the agenda, hold your peace for the moment. We'll give you time after, but this is any other item of business or something that you want to address Planning Commission with. Anybody? Anybody online wish to speak? Okay, well, we're moving right through all that. So let's move right to item F, public hearings, new. And our first item, I think we have a staff report coming to us.
Correct. This is going to be Senior Planner Savage, who is going to be presenting remotely.
Okay.
Senior Planner Savage, we're sharing the PowerPoint now.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. This evening, we have an application for Element 7 for a conditional use permit and coastal development permit for a cannabis retail facility in an existing 1,500 square foot retail space in a strip mall located at 1628 Broadway. In addition to the retail facility, the applicant is applying for a license for general cannabis use distribution, which is a principally permitted use in the service commercial district. Here's the general project location. Click, please.
Yep.
Zooming in, the red rectangle shows the location of the storefront in the strip mall, which was formerly Subway. The mall contains 5 stores. Click, please. Bevmo is directly to the north, and O'Reilly Auto Parts is on the south. Can you click twice, please?
Yeah, sorry, it's delayed. There we go.
Oh, that's okay, sorry. To the south on the end, and a nail salon and UPS store are in between. There you go. Click, please. Here's the storefront. You can click again. Element 7 plans to remodel the interior only. The retail store will be open for delivery and dispensary operations daily from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And they estimate having between 5 and 7 employees. Deliveries for the wholesale distributors, will range from 2 to 3 per week, and deliveries to customers will be approximately 25 to 40 a day. Click, please. The entire strip mall is approximately 20,500 square feet. The mall is split roughly down the middle into 2 separate legal parcels. Click, please. The north parcel contains the proposed retail facility and Bevmo. All the parking spaces for the strip mall are divided across the 2 separate APNs, and between the 2 parcels, there is adequate off-street parking to serve all 5 retail uses. The site has a general service commercial land use designation and is zoned service commercial and is located in the coastal zone. Cannabis retail in the CS zone district requires a conditional use permit. And since the site is located in the coastal zone, the conditionally permitted use also requires a CDP. The applicant is proposing distribution, a general cannabis use, which is a principally permitted use and does not require a CUP. As described in the staff report, staff believes the necessary findings can be made to approve the cannabis retail CUP and CDP. Here is a recommendation, and when you're ready, I can provide the suggested motion, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senior Planner Savage, for that presentation on the Element 7 Cannabis Retail Facility. We have 3 cannabis retail facilities on our docket tonight, and this is the first. Are there any questions? I'd first like to open up for questions from commissioners for Senior Planner Savage.
I have 2 questions that go to the intensity of traffic, and these may be better if the applicant's available, but one is on the number of deliveries or trips, 25 to 40. I'm wondering if that's car trips from, van trips from the site, or if that's how many people per day are expected to receive a delivery with then fewer trips. Do you know the answer to that, Lisa?
Can you say your question again, please?
So the 25 to 40 deliveries per day to customers, are those like 40 addresses and fewer trips than that, or is that 25 to 40 trips from that facility?
I think it could be potentially less. It's similar to, the previous business there was Subway sandwiches, and it would be the same thing. If they have a bunch going out at once, then they would batch them up. And if not, they might do some individual deliveries also.
Okay, and then similarly on number of employees, is that 5 to 7 that's listed in the staff report? Is that on site at one time, or is that total employment?
That's total employment.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from the commission? Okay, let's open it up to the general public. Is there anyone here who would like to speak to this project? Anyone online like to speak to this project on Zoom? Lisa, can you bring back up the motion, please, for us? I'd be willing to hear a motion from one of the commissioners if you're
I'll go
ready.
ahead. I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution finding this project is exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving a conditional use permit and coastal development permit for the Element 7 cannabis retail facility at 1628 Broadway.
Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. No additional questions, so let's go ahead and put it to the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And no abstentions. All right, well, congratulations, Element 7 Cannabis Retail Facility. You are approved to move forward. Let's move into F2, the CUDA Cannabis Retail Facility. And we're going to hear a staff report on that one as well.
Yes, this will again be Senior Planner Savage. Let me find. Okay, Lisa.
Thank you, Kristen. As you said, this the second application is from CUDA for a conditional use permit for cannabis retail facility in an existing 3,200 square foot single-story retail building located at 12 West 4th Street. In addition to the retail facility, the applicant is applying for a license for general cannabis use manufacturing, which is a principally permitted use in the Hinge Industrial Zone District. And presently the building is licensed for general cannabis use distribution, also a principally permitted use. Here's the general plan project location. Zooming in, the red rectangle shows the location of the storefront on West 4th Street. The site is located one building in from the northwest corner of 4th and A Streets. Here's the storefront. CUDA plans to remodel the interior only. In the 2,600 square foot back room, the proposed manufacturing use will be co-located with the existing distribution use. There is a 600 square foot front room with restroom, office, and 250 square foot storefront space where the retail portion will be located. There will be between 9 and 10 employees, and the retail storefront will be open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. The site has a light industrial land use designation and is zoned Hinge Industrial. Cannabis retail in the HN Zone District requires a conditional use permit. Final slide. As described in the staff report, staff believes the necessary findings can be made to approve the cannabis retail CUP. Here is a recommendation, and when you're ready, I can provide the suggested motion. Thank you.
Unlike our last one, this one has no on-site parking. So I wanted to get a little more info from staff. If Lisa could address that. I saw it discussed in the staff report, and it seemed to be the argument was being made that there was an abundance of street parking. And while I admit that seems to be the case, I did visit the site this afternoon, and there were a number of spaces occupied along 4th Street in front of the building. And I guess I'm just interested in whether or not this is within the parking assessment district or where there's any in lieu fees, anything like that. It would help make that argument for not having any parking available for either customers or the staff.
Go ahead, Senior
want me to
Planner
answer that
Savage.
one, Kristen?
Did you hear the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, thank you. There is, like discussed in the staff report, ample parking along 4th Street and A Street, I believe. If you look at the site location, you can see that the building is built out completely to 100% of the lot. There's no room for any parking in the alley, so they're basically grandfathered in for the situation that they are in.
And I don't believe it's in the parking assessment district.
Thank you, Kristen.
Okay.
Other questions for
Thanks.
staff? Okay, anyone from the general public like to comment on this proposed project, on this application? Anyone online wish to comment? Okay, seeing none, Senior Planner Savage, could you bring back up the motion?
I see the applicant on Zoom. Max, if you want to comment, you can unmute yourself. Okay, not unmuting, so.
Sorry, it just took me a second there to find it. No, I'll just comment that we are excited to get this going and be able to interface directly with the public and hopefully keep some of the Humboldt thing going.
Thank you, Mr. Petrus.
Thank you.
I'd like to entertain a motion to approve this project.
I'll be willing to move that for approval, and I'll note, Senior Planner Savage made a good point that we do have an existing building that could be used for a variety of other things, and given that it's mostly dedicated to distribution, which is a low employee, low public parking demand use, I think we have ample grounds to justify not having any parking to support the new business. So I'll move that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution finding the project exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving the use permit for the Cuda cannabis retail facility at 12 West 4th Street.
I'll second.
Any further discussion or commentary? Okay, let's put it to a vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Congratulations, Cuda Cannabis Retail Facility. Thank you for doing business in Eureka. I note that this facility was next to Dick Taylor Chocolate and the other one was next to Jack in the Box. I guess this is an argument in favor of the Munchies. All right, let's hear the third one, F3, Green Rush Cannabis Retail Facility.
All right, this is Assistant Planner Smith presenting.
Thank you, Commissioners. The project before you for consideration is a conditional use permit and coastal development permit for Green Rush Cannabis Retail Facility at 2742 Broadway. Oh, can I have the clicker? Sorry. Here's a bird's eye view of the project site which is located in the southeast portion of the city. Zooming in closer, you can see the project site is located on the western side of Broadway at the T-shaped intersection of Broadway and West Henderson Street. The site has a land use designation of general service commercial and is located in the service commercial zone district within the coastal zone of the city. The land use proposed is cannabis retail, and cannabis retail uses in the service commercial zone require a conditional use permit and a coastal development permit. The applicant proposes to utilize a 230 square foot portion of an existing commercial building currently occupied by the walk-in lobby and service counter for Gold Rush Coffee as a cannabis retail facility. Green Rush Cannabis will occupy the front or eastern portion of the building, and Gold Rush Coffee will occupy the remaining western portion of the building. A wall will be built to create the second tenant space and completely separate the two. It is important to note that patrons of Gold Rush Coffee will not have access to Green Rush Cannabis, and Green Rush Cannabis patrons will not have access to Gold Rush Coffee. Green Rush Cannabis will only be accessible by walk-in, and Gold Rush Cannabis will only be accessible through the drive-through window. Additional site improvements include the installation of one door to allow cannabis employees to access the restroom, a closet containing a safe for storage of cannabis products, as well as site improvements deemed necessary for security and odor control, including 5 security cameras, an alarm system, additional door locks, and an air purifier. When the original coastal development permit for Gold Rush Coffee was approved in 1997, a fence was built between the developed portion of the parcel and the neighboring vegetated area, as required as a mitigation measure for protecting the neighboring environmental sensitive habitat area. This fence was built, and since the prior approval, approximately sometime between 2019 and 2021, a trash enclosure was built on the east side of this required fence on a previously disturbed portion of the site without the benefit of permits or reviews. Although fences are not normally considered structures and do not require development permits, when a fence is located between the first road and the sea, which is the case here, a development permit is required. The trash enclosure has been included in this report in an effort to legalize the structure and is approximately 12 feet by 19 feet, 6 feet in height, made of metal chain link fence with screening slats and a locking mechanism. As outlined in the staff report, staff believes the necessary findings can be made for approval of the conditional use permit and coastal development permit. Therefore, staff's recommendation is to hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution to find the project is exempt from CEQA and approving with conditions the conditional use permit and the coastal development permit. I have a suggested motion here, but I can stop screen sharing to allow for the public hearing.
Okay, we know the drill. Let's hear from the commission first.
Yeah, I want to disclose I had ex parte communication on this. I was contacted by Marianne McCulloch, who, with her husband Bruce, owned the neighboring property. There was initially some confusion about a 2-foot easement shown on the site plan, but we eventually figured out that was on the opposite property line, the one shared with the Chevron station. They also had concerns about the fact that the parking spaces for their property were shown on the site plan. I think on the exhibit we just saw, you could see it. There is an easement for access that was given some years back, but it didn't include use of the parking area on their property, which is currently vacant. It's not, the business isn't in operation, but that's the extent of the conversation. And I noted in the staff report that the parking wasn't being used or credited for the development, so it seemed like that issue was resolved. So that's all I have to report on that, but I wanted to get that out there before we start talking about it.
Yeah, kind of on a similar vein, just to clarify, are there any expansions of the footprint associated with this above current conditions?
No, there's no expansion of the footprint of the existing facility proposed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
Just one. There was a letter with regard to this, a comment received after the staff report was published, and the person seemed to think that pedestrian walk-up was a problem, but from the letter it seemed like they are a Gold Rush Coffee customer who currently walks up, and my understanding from the staff report and your presentation is only drive-through at Gold Rush, only walk-up at Green Rush, correct?
Yeah, I discussed this with the applicant earlier today, and I think during public comment, maybe the applicant can speak to this as well, but the drive-through window could still serve a pedestrian like it did during the times of COVID. So that is one possible solution for a patron who's looking to get coffee on foot.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Assistant Planner Smith, you're lucky because we've all been sitting in these chairs for a year or so now, and at the beginning we all had tons of questions about odor and secondary containment and how far is this from any place where there are children, and we had tons and tons of concerns, and Riley Topolewski and staff have created an ordinance, since then. So for the general public who's seeing 3 different cannabis facilities on the docket tonight being passed in fairly short order, it's partly because we really understand this at this point. Doesn't mean that, and this is a personal comment, doesn't mean that we necessarily love it or agree with it or want this. I'm just going to speak personally. I still do not favor having, I would like to see a top a cap on cannabis facilities in the city of Eureka, but we have political direction from city council to let laissez-faire capitalism happen and let the market decide how many facilities is enough. And so it's not a matter of sometimes for us commissioners of what we want or what we think is good for our community. It's simply a matter of, does this meet code? Does it fit the ordinances and the general plan? And they do. And our staff spends a lot of time really developing the applications to a place where they're really well prepared to come for our vote. So I'll stop there and have no problem supporting this third cannabis dispensary.
Public comment.
Yeah, let's hear public comment on this, starting with anyone in the House, in chambers. Well, good, thank you. Just go ahead and put your mouth close to the mic and you'll
Close
have
enough.
3 minutes.
Hi, so I'm Tashina Benson, owner of Gold Rush Coffee and the applicant for Green Rush. And to address some of the issues in regards to patrons still being able to walk up, as well as parking issues. Firstly, with patrons being able to walk up, in the time of COVID, we serviced patrons that were on foot with no issue whatsoever. And we recently actually just had opened our lobby to patrons in May. So we were closed for over 2.5 years, and it wasn't really a problem for customers on foot. And surprisingly, even though our lobby is open, some people choose to still do the walkthrough of going through the drive-through with the cars. So I don't personally believe that will be an issue with our customers. And, Jitterbean does the same exact thing, as well as Dutch Brothers. They don't have a lobby for their customers to come in, and they allow walkthrough. So we would never deny a customer in that sense. So it is going to be very strict in regards to how we service our customers. And we do plan on having very clear signage of, if you are going to use the drive-through, that is going to be only for coffee. You will not be getting any marijuana through that. And same goes for patrons that, are going to walk in and think that they can be serviced coffee and or food, because that is not allowed in the state. And we're also going to have a security guard at the very front that'll be checking IDs, because I know that is one of the main concerns, considering the coffee shop does serve under 21-year-olds. In regards to parking, it is my understanding that we have enough parking to accommodate any customers that would be visiting the cannabis dispensary, as well as Gold Rush customers that would like to be on foot, whatever that might be. And I know it was raised as a concern as pedestrians entering the cannabis dispensary and their safety. And in the 20 plus years that Gold Rush Coffee has been in existence, there's never been a pedestrian safety issue.
Thank you for adding commentary. Yes.
Tashina, would you be
Okay.
willing to? I wanted to see, since you've been managing the coffee shop, you'd have a better idea about vacancy rates within the parking area in terms of. I mean, I drive by it fairly regularly.
I would say that our vacancy rates are very high. It's mostly employees that are using our parking spots, and we have at max 3 employees on, like, within a shift cycle that would be taking up. Sometimes it's only 2 parking spots if they choose to walk and or ride their bike, or if they're ride sharing. The biggest issue that we deal with our parking is going to be vagrants. And that is something that we're constantly dealing with, where I have to make the phone call for them to get towed out and get the police involved. That's who takes up our parking more than anything. And that's the biggest issue. So I wouldn't say that there'd be any impact with bringing in a cannabis company.
Plus, you'll have a security guard there.
Which is going to be huge, because I'm the security guard right now. I'm over it.
Okay, thanks for answering that.
Yep.
Any other comments for the applicant while she is with us?
I love the idea of a place I can go in the morning for my go juice and a place I can go on the way home for my wind down stuff.
We got you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments from the general public? Anyone online? I don't see any hands up. Oh, yeah. Oh, good. Good. Yeah, come on forward. Welcome.
I'm Mark McCulloch. I own the property of Mr. Fish right next door to Gold Rush presently. Thank you, Steve. I'm Mark.
Really apologize. I'm a big Kids in the Hall fan. What can I say? It's,
No problem.
I know your name by now, you think.
I just wanted to thank you for listening to my wife last night on a Sunday night. Appreciate that, and also you this afternoon too. I was mostly concerned about the way the map showed parking on my property, just to make sure that that's not part of the equation. And I like to have good relations with my neighbors. Sometimes it's not easily done. I realize that my property isn't the prettiest piece of property in town, but I try to do my best to keep the trash down and vagrants out. And I hope that the Gold Rush, Green Rush will prosper. I also question how many are in town as far as, like you said, see who survives, you know. But so be it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? We've got lots of time. Anyone online wish to make comments? I don't see any hands up. Okay. Melissa, could you bring the motion back up? While she's doing that, I'll just make clear, while Tashina shares a last name with me, I don't have to recuse myself. I haven't seen her in any family photo albums or family reunions. First time I'm meeting her, although we may be, 10th cousins, 6th time removed. One never knows. But I will be voting on this, yes.
I'll make the motion just to kind of share the responsibility. I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution finding the project is exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving a conditional use permit and a coastal development permit for the Green Rush Cannabis Retail Facility at 2742 Broadway.
I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? Okay, let's put it to the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Green Rush Cannabis, welcome to Eureka. And thank you, Assistant Planner Smith. Okay, we are now moving to item F4, the modification of Sorrel Leaf Healing Center, a conditional use permit and design review. This is one that we heard in the past, and now there's we'll hear about whatever the modification to that might be. And it looks like we have a staff report for this one as well.
Yes, and this is again Assistant Planner Melissa Smith.
Commissioners, the project before you for your consideration are modifications to the Sorrel Leaf Healing Center's conditional use permit and design review. Here's a bird's eye view of where the project is located. In the context of city limits, the project site is located in the northeast portion of the city, very near the city's boundary. Zooming in a bit closer. There we go. And zooming in closer yet, the 13.5 acre site is zoned RS 12,000 with a land use designation of estate residential, is located off of Indianola Road, south of the Highway 101 corridor, west of Indianola Cutoff and Walker Point Road, with the city boundary directly to the south and one parcel east. The applicant proposes to create a mental health crisis facility for children ages 7 to 18. There will be a crisis residential treatment program providing stays of up to 30 days with 12 patient rooms in total. And outpatient aftercare will also be available to former CRT program participants during evenings and weekends. The facility will require a total of 24 employees with a minimum of 13 clinical staff on site at all times. A charitable institution is a conditionally permitted use in the RS 12,000 zone requiring a conditional use permit. Since the project is a conditional use that is enlarging the footprint of an existing facility, design review is also required. The conditional use permit and design review were approved by Planning Commission in November of 2022. The proposed project is located in the coastal zone and requires a coastal development permit. With the majority of the project site located within the California Coastal Commission's retained CDP jurisdiction, a request for permit consolidation was made and accepted to allow for one consolidated CDP to be processed by the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission approved the coastal development permit in April of this year. Their staff report with conditions has been included as attachment 3. The Coastal Commission's director has determined that the currently proposed changes to the coastal development permit are immaterial in nature, and that determination will be reported to the Coastal Commission on this Thursday, July 13th at their regularly scheduled meeting. Here's a brief overview of the structures that exist on the site currently. The property contains an existing 3-story, 4,872 square foot single family residence, an attached 739 square foot carport, which will be removed and replaced with an addition, a 1,042 square foot accessory building. The site also contains a storage shed and a gazebo, which will both be removed. The site is served by city water but not sewer, and the existing septic system to be abandoned and replaced is located east of the existing residence. The proposed modifications to the original proposal are as follows. Under the previous approval, the facility would provide 24-hour emergency stays in the crisis stabilization unit, 30-day residential stays in the crisis residential treatment portion of the facility, and continuing outpatient therapy for CRT patients. Under the proposed modifications, the facility will no longer offer the CSU program. I don't know why it stopped working. Great. Okay. The applicant continues to propose to remodel the existing residence. The previous approval included renovating the 3rd floor of the existing residence to contain administrative offices, but under the proposed modification, the 3rd floor will be renovated into an attic space for storage. Under the previous approval, the existing carport attached to the residence was to be removed and a 3,167 square foot 1-story building addition built in its place. Under the proposed modifications, the addition continues to be proposed, but will be 3,239 square feet in size. The existing accessory building, originally called the Art and Music Therapeutic Space, will now be completely renovated with a new 656 square foot 1-story addition, creating an art and administration building with an art therapy area along with offices and bathrooms. Under the previous approval, solar panels were proposed on the roof of both the main residence and the proposed building addition. Modifications to the project include removing the proposed solar panels from the main residence, adding more solar panels to the new building addition, and adding solar panels to the existing accessory structure. The proposed movement pavilion footprint has changed from 462 square feet to 717 square feet and has been relocated slightly to the south. The proposed barn footprint has been reduced from 1,176 square feet to 1,096 square feet, and the location of the barn has been moved approximately 50 feet to the southeast. The proposed greenhouse footprint has been reduced from 600 square feet to 375 square feet, and the location of the greenhouse has shifted slightly to the southeast. Under the proposed modifications, the new primary and reserve leach fields have been expanded and relocated to the southwest to account for required groundwater separation determined necessary by monitoring since the original permit approvals. The proposed number of parking spaces has been reduced from 29 to 28. And although no changes to the driveway were originally proposed, modifications include repaving and widening the driveway. It is important to note with all of the above modifications, the total ground disturbance will be 73,717 square feet to a maximum depth of 8 feet, which is an increase from the original proposal by 30,180 square feet. On to the design review portion of the project modifications. Here is a look at the existing residence's front or north-facing facade. Next are the design renderings approved under the original proposal, which can be compared side by side with the updated elevation renderings. Only slight changes have occurred due to the change in configuration of the proposed building addition. It's important to note that although some minor changes have occurred to the site plan, none of the design review findings changed under the proposed modifications, and the overall design aesthetic to be achieved has remained the same. Here you can see the existing residence's south-facing facade, and then comparing the design renderings from the original approval with the updated design renderings for the proposed modifications, you can see only minor changes are occurring, including the removal of the solar panels on the main residence and minor changes in configuration of the proposed building addition. For all the reasons presented here and included in the staff report, staff recommends the Planning Commission hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution finding the project is exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving the application for modifications. Available today for questions either in person or via Zoom are the project's principal engineers, Angie Dodd and Praj White, as well as on Zoom, the executive director, Evan Buxbaum, and the administrative director, Beth Anderson. I do have a suggested motion, but we stopped screen sharing to allow for public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Let's first start with the commission who may have questions for Assistant Planner Smith or Taj White or Angie Dodd or Evan Buxbaum. I'll start off with the questions. First of all, I'm really happy to see just very, very minimal changes to this modification. It's pretty slim. Almost didn't need to come to us, but we thank you that you did bring it to us to have a look at this again. And I'm very happy to see that there was monitoring going on with the septic system, and that leach field has since then been expanded, based on groundwater results and all that. So that's good. We've learned the applicants have learned something and applied it. That's always good. Here's my question, and anyone can answer this who knows the answer from the applicants. Is there a net gain or a net loss in solar panels? Or is it just the same?
You got a definitive. It's a net gain.
It's a net gain. Okay. So you'll be producing more energy rather than less. Okay, good. Thank you, Praj White. Any other questions from commissioners for the applicants? Go ahead, Commissioner Lazar.
Yeah, so thanks for the presentation. It was very helpful the way you broke down the modifications. I guess I was following along, but I struggled to see at one point towards the end, you mentioned the footprint being around 80,000 square feet, I think, or something like that. And then you said that the change, this would result in an increase in 30,000 square feet. You were also adding in the depth at that time. So was that truly 30,000 square feet of change in footprint?
And I think the word footprint maybe is being misinserted into that sentence. I was talking about total ground disturbance overall for the whole.
The depth as well.
Yeah, so the depth would be 8 feet, and and that also includes. I think yes, it's a volume measurement. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that seemed a little high for what we were hearing. Okay. Thank you.
Well, and is the reason it's so significantly increased primarily due to the increase of the widening of the drive, the access drive?
Yeah, slight increases to the structures, widening of the driveway, as well as I believe their current proposal also includes the total ground disturbance for all of the landscaping in between the structures. Yeah, there we go. And the increase substantially in the septic field as well.
Okay, thank you.
I have an operational kind of curiosity question. I would hope one of the operators of the facility could tell me what, in layman's terms, the services that won't be offered that were previously proposed. What is it that is not being offered now?
I can answer that. This is Evan Buxbaum. I'm the executive director and chairman of the board. We had planned originally to do a 3-bed crisis stabilization. Stabilization is up to 24 hours of basically crisis de-escalation and and then you move them to a long-term facility. Since the time that we applied, the county has taken some steps to create beds for crisis stabilization. And we were hearing from our community partners and from the hospitals that the real need was a place for longer term, deeper healing for the kids. So we moved away and we promised the county 12 beds. And so we just switched those crisis stabilization beds to longer term crisis residential beds. But all other services that were planned to be available will still be available. And the crisis stabilization will move to a county facility.
I really appreciate that. I'm very pleased to hear that the community's not losing those. It's just getting allocated differently. All right, I'm good.
Okay, let's open it up to public comment. Anyone in the house? Looks like Angie Dodd would like to speak. Go ahead, you'll have 3 minutes. And
Yeah.
stick around in case we have questions for you.
Okay. My name is Angie Dodd. I'm with North Point Consulting Group. I just wanted to clarify a couple of items. So the increase in ground disturbance is just everything, including paving, leach fields, septic. It was landscaping. It was just all of it, just to be clearly opaque on everything that's being done to the site. And then I just wanted clarification on why the third story is just for storage. It's, there's strict licensing and grant requirements for this facility, and the amount, an elevator and renovations interior to be able to use the third story for office spaces was just not feasible with the financing and grant funding that was available. So we had to get creative and use the existing accessory structure, and that's why we're expanding that structure slightly. So that I just wanted another clarification. It sounds like you got the clarification of why the septic leach field has been moved. We're required to do groundwater monitoring, and to create that separation required us to move it more upland, so that we're working directly with environmental health to make that work. I think you spoke to the immaterial amendment with the Coastal Commission. That's already going through. I also wanted to thank planning staff. These ladies are wonderful, and they've been really helpful, and they're very thorough and ask lots of questions. So it's very well presented, and I just really appreciate that it's clear, concise, and I think everything was shared. So Praj and I are here if you have any questions, and thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thanks for throwing some love to staff. We love hearing that.
Yeah.
Anyone else from the general public like to speak to this project or comment on it? Anyone online? Okay, let's bring it back to the commission. I would like to say that in a rather sour way, I talked about cannabis as maybe being something that I have to say yes to. I don't necessarily want to, but this is a project that I want to say yes to. It was very heartfelt when it was presented to us last time. I think all of us had a similar reaction, that this is really filling a need and building capacity for mental health, especially for children and youth. And I'm really glad to see that it's moving ahead, and appreciate the board and Dr. Buxbaum. Thank you for your leadership and vision, and to the consultants for bringing the technical aspects forward in such a lovely way. Any other comments from the commission before we hear a motion? Go ahead.
So this is just a thought, and sometimes things like this can be worse than helpful, but hearing Angie talk about kind of the logistics and investment required to unlock access to the upper story for use, I mean, I'd hate to think that in the future, if expansion was needed, we got to go back through a coastal permitting process when we've kind of vetted the majority of the project's impacts at this juncture. And I don't know if the applicant or their agent would be interested in this, but we could approve that concept as a phased element, with up to the applicant's decision whether they choose to make that investment. Obviously, that would change the amount of employee potential and beds and all that kind of thing. But I don't think I have too great of a concern about parking-related demand increasing significantly. So just a thought, just since we're here and we're doing a modification, and maybe we would have to again, I don't know whether that would make that threshold. Maybe we could get that in. If it's below the threshold of what would trigger a modification like we have tonight, maybe we don't need to address it, but I'd be interested to hear from staff on that.
I was thinking the same thing in regards to the types of beds. I mean, it sounds like the county will be able to, accommodate that for now, but things do change, and we already approved that use. I'm wondering if we could just authorize both, depending on if there needs to be flexibility in future. So yeah, I was considering a similar thought, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
So Assistant Planner Smith, I think we have a question for you. Can we add to that motion that additional space, be in the third story, be approved for attic use or office use or other to be decided? Is that possible for us to do that, just to give the owners more flexibility in the future?
I think that it's possible. I'm trying to find the appropriate wording to add to that motion. I wonder if it is something to the effect with and allow for modern modifications at the applicant's discretion in future phases of the project.
Yeah, maybe minor modification limited to items related to, a scope of operations that have already been reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission. So that way, it's things that we would have already authorized from the first hearing, which could apply to both the beds and the office use potentially. What does the
Dr.
commission
Bucksbaum,
think?
if you're still online and could answer, before we do backbends and wordsmith this motion, is that something that's desirable for you and the board?
Oh yeah,
okay.
It was truly heartbreaking to have to give up that third floor. There are 2 usable rooms, and we really couldn't get around the ADA accessibility issue. But if new technology appears, or if elevators become more available, and we can figure that out, I would love language in there that leaves that as a possibility down the road. I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
So, I mean, just a thought, but I think the more we try to wordsmith it, the more we're going to screw something up. So it seems like if we keep it fairly broad and just say for future phased expansion, including use of the third floor for the over, period, then we've got, there's a range of uses and activities and services rendered in the remainder of the site that will and the building that will be used, and any of those, some combination thereof, could be contemplated. I think that's kind of the general thrust I was thinking, if that encapsulates things.
I guess a follow-up for the director of the facility then, would any language about flexibility surrounding the the use of the beds as discussed earlier, would that be helpful as well, or can we leave that one out of the motion?
I think we're pretty locked in for the 20-year life of the grant to 12 residential treatment beds. And any expansion would probably definitionally mean an expansion of the facility. So I don't think we need that, but the keeping the language open for the availability of the third floor would probably be helpful.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm personally comfortable with the direction that Commissioner Lazar would like to take it.
Assistant Planner Smith, do you have a revised motion that you might present to us, or does Commissioner Lazar want to?
I can probably work with what we have, and then.
Okay. Could you bring it up for us?
Yeah. I have some light verbiage that I wrote down from what you said, so I would just be adding that into the motion that exists here on the screen.
Yeah, and I can kind of do it on the fly if that's okay, and see if it matches what you're thinking. So I'll make a motion that I move the Planning Commission adopt the resolution finding the project exempt from CEQA, the project being a modification and conditionally approving modifications to the conditional use permit and design review for Sorrel Leaf Healing Center at 124 Indianola Road, including the allowance for a future phase involving use of the third floor? Yeah, third floor of the structure, the residential structure.
I'll second that motion. Any further discussion?
I just want to say I really appreciate Commissioners Benson and Freitas taking us that direction. That's very useful.
Okay, no further discussion. Let's put this to the vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. All right. Sorrel Leaf Healing Center. Blessings.
Thank you.
Okay, moving to item F5, the Clark Annex property surplus.
All right. I will be presenting on that. Let me just share my screen. All right. The City of Eureka is proposing to declare the city-owned parcel containing the Clark Historical Museum Annex as surplus under the California Surplus Land Act. The property is located in the north portion of the city in the coastal zone. The inland boundary of the coastal zone is delineated in blue here. The parcel is located on the west side of East Street between 3rd Street and Opera Alley. The parcel is 3,145 square feet in size and is developed as an annex to the Clark Historical Museum. The parcel has a land use designation of core waterfront commercial and is zoned waterfront commercial. I think that's incorrect. I think it's zoned retail, core retail commercial. I apologize. The Clark Annex was built in 1979. It is attached to the north side of the museum structure and designed to house the Clark's large local Native American collections. The city has leased the property to the Clark Historical Museum for decades, but now wishes to transfer ownership and maintenance responsibilities to the museum. Since the city first put this matter on the Planning Commission's agenda in March, city staff has met with representatives of the Clark Historical Museum, and the museum board has voted in favor of the city moving ahead with the surplus process. Okay, so I'm going to take a minute to explain the Surplus Land Act requirements placed on local governments, because I think this is important context. The Surplus Land Act is a right of first refusal law requiring local agencies to offer surplus land for sale or lease for affordable housing and or recreational or open space purposes before selling or leasing the land. Unless the land qualifies as exempt surplus land, the local agency must provide a written notice of availability of the property for development of low and moderate income housing to a list of housing sponsors kept by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. And entities interested in purchasing or leasing the surplus land for affordable housing then have 60 days to notify the local agency of their interest. And if interest is received, the local agency must negotiate in good faith with the interested entity for a period of not less than 90 days. And if an agreement is reached, then this local agency must sell or lease the land for affordable housing. If the land meets an exemption in the act, or no one responds to the notice of availability, or if the local agency does not agree to a price and terms with an interested entity during the negotiation period, then the land can be sold or leased for other purposes. Separately, land in the coastal zone must follow the same process, but to make the land available for open space purposes. The Clark Annex property meets an exemption for the affordable housing provisions, so the land does not need to be put up for affordable housing first. However, the property is in the coastal zone, so the city must first notice the availability of land for open space purposes before we can do what we want with it. So once council declares the property surplus, if they do so, the city is required to first notice the availability of the land for open space purposes, and the notice must be sent to the State Resource Agency and to any applicable city or county park or recreation department and regional park authority. If no one responds to the notice within 60 days, or if the city does not agree to a price and terms during the subsequent 90-day good faith negotiation period, the requirements of the Surplus Land Act have been fulfilled, and the city can dispose of the property to the Clark Historical Museum for the community benefit. Ultimately, it will be up to the city council to negotiate the terms and determine what best serves the interest of the community. So, Pursuant to our Eureka Municipal Code, Planning Commission is required to advise and recommend to City Council on all dispositions of city-owned property. And there's a city policies and procedures sale of city-owned real property document that was included as an attachment to the staff report. That requires the Planning Commission to find that the property is not necessary for city use. Its size and shape are adequate for development of permitted uses, and the location, purpose, and extent of the disposition is consistent with the general plan. So as discussed in the staff report, staff believes the necessary findings of approval can be made and recommends that Planning Commission receive the report and adopt a resolution. Hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution finding the surplus by the City of Eureka of the Clark Annex parcel is exempt from CEQA and recommending the City Council declare the property surplus. And I'm available for questions as well as our city manager.
I guess I have a question. If once the Clark Museum takes ownership of that building, if we approve this, will they then have to do anything to the building to modify its architecture to look like the building that they already owned? Or can they just receive it as it is without major modifications?
There wouldn't be a requirement that they modify it in any way.
Okay. Other questions from commissioners?
I guess, could you try to tell us, and you probably did already, but maybe just in the simplest terms possible, the difference between what we're bringing forward tonight versus what we saw previously, like the principal change from when this first appeared?
When it was agendized in March, it was the same thing. It was, I modified the staff report some since then, but it was the same thing coming before you. It's just that at that time, we pulled it because there was a lot of concern that we were surplusing it to put it up for something else when that's not the intent.
That's what I thought, but I appreciate you spelling it out like that, so thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, let's move it to the general public. Anyone like to comment on this application? Good, yeah, step forward, tell us your name, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi there, folks. My name is Josh Buck. I'm the Executive Director, Curator of the Clark Historical Museum. And I just want to clarify once again to the public that we have been in communication with the city on this project, and I'd like to thank city staff for doing so. At this point in time, we are still leasing the structure from the city of Eureka. And while we are very enthusiastic with the idea of acquiring this building in the future, we do have a point of concern, which is that we have a roof leak. Now, we have been leasing this structure for a long time on the condition that the city would maintain the outside of the structure. And we are hoping that under the lease that we currently have, that repair will take place prior to the transfer of ownership, if this goes the way that we all hope it will. And I was just wondering if anyone here tonight could clarify as to whether or not that may be a condition moving forward. Thank you.
We're not really able to answer you directly, but we can pose that question to staff indirectly, and you'll be able to hear an answer. Do you have other comments?
The only other comment I have at this time is that we are, again, enthusiastic about moving forward in this process, and thank you very much for your time and having us here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Any other comments from the public?
I'm not seeing anybody on Zoom.
Okay, well, let's move it back to the commission, and I'll go ahead and ask Principal Planner Kristen Kenyon, what's your understanding of the repair to the roof and whether that will be done before this would be transferred? Whose responsibility will that be under the lease, or do you?
I saw City Manager Slattery just unmuted himself, so I'm gonna. defer.
We're happy to have City Manager Miles Slattery join us. Go ahead, Miles. Speak when you're ready.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening, Commission. So this has been an issue for a long time. We have tried to deal with this roof for a very long time, and saying whether or not it's fixed or it's not fixed is very difficult. We've had probably 4 different contractors out there trying to work with this roof. And I can assure you that we will do our best to make sure that whatever we can do to get it in a good spot, we will do. And we've done that. I mean, we spent $40,000 on the roof the last 2 years. And we'll make sure that we can do whatever we can. We can't guarantee that that roof and the way that it was built is going to be guaranteed to be secure, but we'll definitely work with the Clark Museum to make sure that we can do whatever we can to make sure that it's in the best spot that we can get it at, but we cannot hold on to that liability for that long. That was one of the main reasons why we've been doing this. We have spent an exorbitant amount of money on this property, and we have other properties throughout the city. We have 86 buildings, 13 parks, and a lot of other places that we've been spending a lot of money on. And we've been doing our best to keep it up as good as we can. But the way that this building was built and the way that it was put on there, there's a lot of roofing companies there that will tell you that it's very difficult to figure this out. It's a flat roof. You can't guarantee certain things. There's a lot of leafy debris, a lot of things that go on there that you don't know what's going to happen. But right now it's in a good spot. But we will do whatever we can before we transfer ownership to make sure that it's in the best condition possible.
Thank you, City Manager Slattery. So can the commission assume that this, from what you've said, that the city is planning to give it sort of one more try, but that the applicant ought to be ready and prepared to accept the roof in an as-is condition at some point?
100%. I mean, prior to this, I have to take blame because the communication wasn't very good prior to this, and we had a very good meeting with the board of the museum, and it went very well. But they're just as much as aware as we are about the difficulties of that building and where it's at. Reminds me of the municipal auditorium. It was built a long time ago. There's not a guarantee that it's going to be this way or that way, but I think that we've come a lot further along, and we've cleared out the gutters. We put in new gutters. We put in, new roofing. We'll do our best to make sure that they're at peace. We do not want to put them in a bad spot, and we want to make sure that they're going to be in a good condition to where they can go in and continue to do what they need to do there.
Thank you. Other questions from the commission?
I guess this is just to kind of reiterate what I think I heard from Principal Planner Kenyon, but Miles would be able to confirm that ultimately, if we as the city are in a position to enter into the Clark Museum with an agreement to sell, there will be additional future negotiations that will take place with the city council. And that's something that could be negotiated at that time, regardless of the decision that the planning commission makes tonight. Is that true?
100%. I mean, where we're at right now is going through the surplus. The action happening tonight is to surplus the property. How that property is exchanged is totally in the future, and that's going to be up to council on how that happens. Right now, the action that you guys are taking is just to surplus the property. What happens with the exchange of that property, price, negotiations, all of those things are going to be at a later date.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for bringing that up. That was my thought as well.
We're out of public comment, but there's just 2 of you out there. Go ahead and come forward and let's hear one more. Let's open back up public comment.
Stuff we just spoke to after the comments. My name is Lynn Sturgis. I'm president of the board at the Clark Museum. I wanted to clarify that the reason it cost, and as far as we can see, about $30,000 to repair, the roof was left to leak for over 2 years. We repeatedly asked the city to come out. They came out and looked from the exterior but never came inside. The roof leak went into the walls, and that's where the majority of your money went, was in the walls, because the roof had leaked for 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to clarify that.
Thank you very much. Okay, Principal Planner Kenyon, could you bring back up that motion?
Yes, no problem.
And I'm sorry to exchange, but she is department director.
Oh, thank you. I've been used to calling.
Right, and congratulations,
Principal Planner,
by the way.
Department Director.
Yes. Director Kenyon, we'll make the note.
Okay. So,
I'm happy to make this motion.
Go ahead.
I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution finding the surplus of the Clark Annex parcel is exempt from CEQA and recommending the City Council declare the property surplus.
I'll second the motion. Any further discussion?
I just wanted to say that when this had come before us last time, I was kind of conflicted about, how to vote on it and how to make the findings. Given that it is kind of unusual that the city built this site and, now sort of a decision is being made to move away from that original intention. But I feel very comfortable with it now. I appreciate staff's work to coordinate further and get this into a place where it seems like everyone's in alignment on how to move forward. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the further discussion on it as well, and it sounds like I feel comfortable with moving forward, finding the parcel in surplus, and then letting the actual transfer be negotiated by others. But I don't see any reason to slow that down at the Planning Commission level. Other comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. So moved. Okay. G, old business. We don't have any. And before asking for a break, I'm willing to hear one more surplus item, H1. So the carriage property.
All right, this is Senior Planner Caitlin Castellano presenting.
Okay, great. Thank you, Director Kenyon. All right. Hello, Commissioners. Good evening. The City of Eureka is proposing to declare another city-owned property as surplus property tonight. So the property is located in the northern portion of the city near the central waterfront in the coastal zone. Just like Kristen's presentation, the inland boundary of the coastal zone is delineated here in blue. Briefly, the parcel is known as the carriage property and is located on the northwest corner of 1st and C Streets, south of Fisherman's Terminal and Jack's Seafood parking lot. The parcel is approximately 0.16 acres in size, which is about 6,970 square feet. It is vacant. It has a land use designation of core waterfront commercial and is zoned CW waterfront commercial. A little bit of background. In 2007, a lot line adjustment created the parcel's current configuration. It previously was shaped like a triangle. And a local coastal program amendment, aka LCP amendment, happened, which rectified zoning and general plan land use designation inconsistencies for this parcel and several around it. The LCP amendment changed the land use designation on this parcel from core coastal dependent industrial, which is what the parcels are to the north and west, to the core waterfront commercial to be consistent with the waterfront commercial zoning that it had had for a long time. The purpose of the LCP amendment was to facilitate some City of Eureka The C Street projects, which included 4 projects in this area as described in the staff report, so I won't go into detail. 2 of them were completed, which was the plaza there, as well as this Fisherman's Terminal and Jack's Seafood and parking lot. The other 2, there was a Seaport Village on the other side, and the old Booner warehouse, which was never came to fruition because they were supposed to apply for another CDP and design review to build on the carriage property, and they never did. And the applicants of that were the Old Town Carriage Company, and that's how it got the name. So here's a street view of the parcel from Google. Oh, sorry. I decided to combine the background and the one before and didn't update that title. I'm not going to go over this diagram again, but let me get my notes out here. Because Kristen did a great job explaining it. So, but unlike the Clark Parcel Museum, the carriage property does not qualify to be exempt. So it does need to be notified for affordable housing. And like the Clark parcel, it does need to be offered for open space purposes. So I'm going to try to go through this briefly as well. So similar to as Kristen explained, the council will declare the property surplus. The city is required to notice it for affordable housing and open space purposes for 60 days. If no one responds or no agreement is made in good faith negotiations in 90 days, the city can sell or lease to a city's chosen entity. In this case, it just gives us the ability to talk with anyone who's interested. Ultimately, as Kristen said, the council will negotiate the terms and determine what the best use for this parcel is in the community interest. And again, this is just a necessary step in order to allow someone to develop this vacant, underutilized parcel. And also wanted to point out that a future project will require a coastal development permit or use permit if a conditional minor use is proposed. It will require design review, and it will require a full CEQA environmental document. Again, our municipal code requires us to report to you, and then you report back to city council, or we will, and then city policy and procedures file 2.01 requires that the lot is not necessary for city use. The size and shape is adequate for development, and location, purpose, and extent is consistent with the general plan. The findings are in the staff report. I also just wanted to call out one more time the CW zone. Under the city's current certified local coastal program, housing is only allowed on the upper floors of a permitted ground floor use, such as a coastal dependent, coastal related, visitor serving, or public or commercial recreational use, which are all prioritized in the CW district. So even if affordable housing did go in here, it would have to go on the second story and have to be mixed use. So therefore, staff recommends that the Planning Commission receive the report and adopt a resolution finding the surplus exempt from CEQA and recommending the city council declare the property as surplus. And we have a motion on the next page. We'll stop sharing. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I guess I have a question with the small size of that parcel. It's more of a curiosity than something related to the motion. What kind of business do you think might be interested in purchasing that?
Well, it meets the minimum parcel size for the zone district, which I think was 6,000. I'd have to pull it up in the staff report. And let's see, what did I say here? I mean, someone could do it. You could, I believe might be in the parking assessment district, so it could be exempt from parking. If it's not, they can pay in lieu fees. They could do parking on the bottom, housing on top, or their offices, then housing on top. But someone was interested in it, and we have to go through this process in order to even talk to the people that are interested in developing the parcel. So there is interest.
Yeah, bike rental or something like that. Yeah, okay, thank you. Any other questions from the commission? Go ahead, Commissioner Lazar.
Is this parcel identified for any housing units under the current?
No, it is not.
Okay, but the parcel immediately adjacent is, right? Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
This is a super spacey question, but did we talk about this site in the last year? Because I remember Commissioner Lazar bringing up the Boone warehouse and how that had, kind of gone the way of the dodo. I don't remember the conversation around that, though, why we were talking about that.
I believe we were talking about it when we were dealing with that parking lot that was being proposed next to Bayfront 1. And Commissioner Lazar was making the point that our coastal, even though we care about view, maybe it was for the LCP update. Like, even though we care about view corridors now, back in the day, our waterfront was a bunch of warehouses.
I did ask for a report on what the status of the Booner warehouse was, because when it was dismantled, it was supposed to be done in a way that it would be able to be rebuilt, at some point. And that we learned from Ray Holman that those materials have gone bye-bye, I think.
Yeah, I think I think we got that question answered.
And it sounds like this site was going to be used, maybe the Booner warehouse was going to be used on this site to be rebuilt, basically, by this proposal for the carriage company.
Yep.
And that's the relationship to tonight.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to try and connect the dots for if we'd already talked about something on this site or not, but it sounds like it was a separate conversation, so thank you.
Other questions or comments from the commission? Okay, let's move to the general public. I don't see anyone in chambers. Is there anyone online who would like to address us? Okay, I see none. Can we see the motion up there again? Director Kenyon. I'll make this motion. I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution finding the surplus of the carriage property is exempt from CEQA and recommending the City Council declare the property surplus.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. All right, motion passes. And before we launch into H2 Eureka waterfront Eureka plan and H3 regulations for vacation rentals, I propose that we just take a 5-minute break and stretch out. Okay, thank you. We are back to order for the City of Eureka Planning Commission July 10th meeting. And what's on the agenda now is item H2, the Waterfront Eureka Plan, WEP. And we'll have a staff report on this one, also from Senior Planner Castellano.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Benson. Tonight, as you said, I am presenting an update, and we are also seeking comments on the public review draft of the Waterfront Eureka Plan that we say WEP, the WEP. The document is attached to your agenda, as you already saw, and it can also be accessed and downloaded from waterfronteureka.com. After tonight's meeting, comments on the draft WEP can be provided at next week's City Council meeting on July 18th or submitted directly through the project website. Again, that's waterfronteureka.com or directly to Development Services Planning. The comment period on the public review draft will end on August 11th, and there will be additional opportunity to comment during the subsequent adoption process. And I guess I can clarify right now, all the comments received will be in a matrix, and we will work hard to address all of them, and we'll have like a red line version of the plan being updated based on comments or just responses to comments. Okay, so briefly, presentation overview. I will share about the plan's purpose and the introduction on the WEP, both of which are included in Chapter 1. We'll briefly go over some background information included in WEP Chapter 2, a summary of public outreach described in WEP Chapter 3, and what we heard as a result of the outreach, which was used to create new core area and land use designation descriptions, included in WEP Chapter 5. We'll talk about future opportunity scenario sketches included in WEP Chapter 4, a summary of proposed goals included in WEP Chapter 5, some of the standards and implementation measures included in WEP Chapters 6 and 7, the anticipated schedule, and questions and comments. So you've already heard this before, but I'll say it again. The purpose of the plan is to provide a roadmap for development and redevelopment of the vacant underutilized sites and buildings along near Eureka's central waterfront, and plan for at least 115 new housing units. The plan does contemplate building those housing units by 2027. And we're hoping we can achieve this with streamlining environmental review of subsequent projects, which that part is still in process, and hopefully I will get it in a couple weeks. So the WEP Chapter 1 introduces the Waterfront Eureka Plan, its guiding principles, organization, and authority of the WEP. Oops, a little too fast on the clicker. So the specific plan is a tool used for systematic implementation of a general plan, which focuses on an area that requires fine-tuning because of its unique uses. There's also another description of a specific plan in the staff report that was provided to you. The Waterfront Eureka Plan focuses on the city's coastal core area. It provides detail on policies and implementation strategies to achieve the community's visions. And the city intends to use this plan and the environmental analysis to inform and facilitate the ongoing comprehensive LCP update and to ensure that the plan and the LCP are consistent. So WEP Chapter 2 includes the background report, and it describes how the WEP is governed by the 1997 Local Coastal Program right now, and will be that way until we get the LCP, Local Coastal Program, updated and certified by the California Coastal Commission. The background report provides statistics such as the plan area has the potential to add over 1,600 jobs and over 1,000 housing units. It describes constraints of the plan area such as sea level rise and loss of parking, which is a perceived constraint, and opportunities in the plan area such as infill development for housing, retail, recreation, historic preservation, tourist services, and entertainment. So also briefly want to touch on this community engagement process is outlined in WEP Chapter 3. The first two workshops were virtual because that's how the project was bid, because we started this in COVID, and it did provide a significant cost savings. The first virtual meeting occurred in March 2022. There were 74 attendees, and they focused on trying to envision the three districts in the plan area, which is the commercial bayfront, Old Town, and Library. Here's a word cloud that was done at that first meeting. These were, the bigger the word, the more times it was listed. The second public event was in June 2022. There was 48 attendees, a little lower because I think there was some big presidential speech or something at the same time, and we didn't know that was going to happen. At that workshop, they focused on the conceptual development scenarios, which I'll touch on later, which included scenarios for sea level rise, tourism, and complete communities. Again, we had a website. It went live on March 2022. We had an online survey that was live from June 2022 and closed in September 2022. That was like 3.5 months approximately. There's 15 questions. We had 218 responses. We had stakeholder meetings. We called them group conversations. There was 6 of them. Each group did a SWOT analysis. That's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I believe this is the combined one from all of them. And then, of course, we did, your last update that you guys got was last July, a year ago. Okay, so the WEP team created 3 alternative scenarios I just mentioned earlier for the 3 districts. So there was 9 total sketches. These scenarios were based on the goals of the California Coastal Act, the vision for the plan area included in the 2040 general plan, and what we heard from the results of the first virtual public workshop. So there was a managed retreat scenario to address sea level rise, because there was a strong response from the community to do that. Tourism and visitor serving scenario. This is really to meet a lot of the Coastal Act goals and support Eureka as a tourist destination. And then the complete communities scenario which prioritizes residents' needs and quality of life to provide balanced set of neighborhood services and uses throughout the plan area. These sketches illustrated the potential maximum development on sites that were currently vacant, or maybe I think one of them was a parking lot in the area, just to give the public an idea of like what it could look like. And so briefly, the next several slides are just the scenarios that we heard through the community, that were portions of each scenario was used to create the preferred scenario, which we are calling I just blanked out on it, the preferred future, sorry. So in the commercial bayfront, the managed retreat scenario, it envisioned open space and marshland to accommodate the sea level rise. So then we saw something like this. And from that, the preferred scenario included elements from this scenario that focuses on recreation assets in the commercial bayfront, design siting standards for sea level rise, including elevation and flood proofing, limiting ground floor residential and flood areas, and increased densities over existing focused areas in Old Town and to a lesser extent in libraries. So, and then here in Old Town, originally envisioned art galleries, live work, residential units as part of the tourism visitor serving scenario. And then here the pieces from this scenario that were taken into the preferred scenario were focuses on visitor serving uses in the commercial bayfront, a mix of residences and visitor serving uses everywhere, basically in wayfinding and pedestrian friendly architecture. And then lastly, out of the library district, as an example, complete communities were envisioned row homes with accessory commercial uses, something like this. And the preferred scenario included elements from this scenario that included residential serving commercial in all districts, but especially the library district, home-based businesses, co-working, childcare, and then a range of housing for all districts. So some major themes of what we heard from our community engagement process was that participants stressed the importance of small businesses. Participants ranked having a safe and attractive plan areas important. Participants voiced that increasing housing options and supporting dense housing was a priority, and participants supported developing the plan area primarily through residential infill and adaptive reuse of existing structures. They supported live-work units and increased density. And from that, we were able to develop some WEP goals that were from what we heard, the 2040 general plan vision, also from the preferred future. These 5 goals were developed. One was diverse mix of residential housing options for all income levels, a safe and vibrant destination for residents, tourists, businesses, and the arts, a thriving business community, safe and enjoyable access to Humboldt Bay, and a plan area that accommodates sea level rise while protecting important infrastructure and resources. So each goal is supported by policies providing specific direction to achieve the goal. The policies are then implemented through the zoning and development standards in WEP Chapter 6 or by actions and projects outlined in WEP Chapter 7, which is the administration and implementation. So briefly, standards and implementation. Let's see, so Chapter 6 includes the regulation standards and guidelines such as, allowed uses and where, and if it's a use permit or a minor use permit needed. The intensity of development such as setbacks and height and site coverage and floor area ratio, as well as there are some design requirements, then also some design guidelines for historic buildings not on the local register, as well as for new buildings to make sure that they don't replicate but fit in well with the existing architecture. Chapter 7, as I said before, it's the administrative and implementation, has the programs and projects to implement the policies associated with the goals. It will include the CEQA streamlining work plan as well as funding opportunities. And then Chapter 8 has the glossary to define the land uses. So the anticipated schedule, tonight we're giving you an update, seeking feedback. Next week on Tuesday, DUDEC will do a similar presentation, probably the same, slightly modified to City Council. Then the public review draft, as I said at the beginning, we'd like our comments by August 11th, so that way we can address them and incorporate anything into the updated draft, and then we're hoping at the earliest we can schedule the public hearings in September for the Planning Commission, and as well as October for the City Council, pending, all goes well. And I think I already said that, we'll have a matrix with all the comments, and kind of similar to an environmental document, right, where you have the comments and then address them and tell them where you can find them, or if it's not applicable. So we are available for questions and comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Senior Planner Castellano. That was really pleased to see this WEP created, and I read through it with interest. I haven't been able to pour the time into it that I would like to. It still requires a little bit more of my time, but I did go through it and read the comments. And one thing that I'd like to say is that it really did a good job of having it. It's very unified with the LCP. So they seemed very consistent with each other, and that I appreciated that. Just a few comments I have on it are. One thing I want to say all the things I appreciated about it. There are many things I appreciated the theme areas, especially the planning area for promoting the waterfront as a destination, and to expand access and strengthen the connectivity to Humboldt Bay, prepare and adapt to sea level rise. I felt that was done extremely well, and I know Director Kenyon that's become sort of a pet interest. Seems to be a pet interest of yours, or something that you're competent at understanding. And it seemed that development, one thing that I got out of this is while the prepare and adapt to sea level rise was in there, I felt that foster diverse, robust business community and housing was almost pre-decisional, that we're going to build a lot in there. And yet at the same time, it's even mentioned having managed retreat. And so it seems like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth a little bit in that document, that, we may end up in conditions where we shouldn't be building on the waterfront, yet we're still planning to build on the waterfront. So, we just haven't really made a strong decision. And so it seems like for me, the WEP my personal comment is that this could be stronger in the area of connectivity, connection to Humboldt Bay, connection to just the Humboldt Bay environment and the Pacific Ocean and the Pacific Flyway and marine life protected areas. I just felt that it was super focused, as it was intended to be, on the Eureka waterfront in those three zones. But what makes the Eureka waterfront such a jewel is that it's part of a crown, and it really is part of the California Coastal Trail and the Great Redwood Trail at the regional level, and the Bay Trail and the Beta Zoo Trail locally. And I somehow, just in reading it, this is just a general comment, that I just felt that it was missing connectivity to Humboldt Bay, to the National Wildlife Refuge, to the Pacific Flyway, the marine life protected areas, to the fishing industry, logging industry in general, and even to the habitats that our buildings are on, which is coastal prairie, salt marsh, and estuarine habitats. And it seems like there's opportunity in the connectivity, the preparation and adaptation to sea level rise. And then looking at the word cloud, the first thing, historic, walkable, the potential, that it's beautiful. Part of beautiful is tied to being able to see things. Park and open space. And housing was sixth. Just want to note that housing was sixth, yet when I read through the WEP, I kind of felt that housing, seemed pre-decisional. And I know that the state has a lot of pressure on us right now to build more housing, but it's just something that we should look at. And then that's all the general comments I have. And then I just want to pull out some of the comments. Bruce Sylvie from Hum Trails, I thought was really on target when when just making it really clear to us that this is going to be part of the Great Redwood Trail, and that the Eureka Waterfront Trail, from my experiences with help, working with Miles Slattery and engineering firms, and when I was director of RCA, the Eureka Waterfront Trail the ABC sections and the Hikshari Trail were really uniquely designed to fit into the type of waterfront that we have, but conditions have changed since rail banking started. You know, we're not limited as much. We have more options for where trails might go in downtown because of you know, rail banking that has occurred. You know, for the North Coast Railroad. So even those sections that go through, that jump from one sidewalk to the other, et cetera, in the more industrial middle section, you know, there's opportunities that we didn't have before when we were designing before that now exist. And so I just want to give a shout out to Bruce Sylvie for that. And then, of course, Colin Fisk with CRTP always has lots of comments. And I guess one thing, a follow-up action, he's talking really about having context-based flexibility in parking requirements, and you know, CRTP always makes you know, big ask, which is great because it's good to have folks who ask for a lot, and it's better to say no but at least get the ideas or to say yes. But he's requesting that the city eliminate minimum parking mandates altogether, and so that question comes to my mind, like, can we conduct a feasibility analysis about this? Like, what would it take? Like, or I'd just be curious to hear from staff, maybe not now, but next time, about, you know, what's the feasibility of doing that? Can we do that? Are we restricted from doing that? Because then he goes on and makes a lot of good points about why that would be beneficial to us. In the bike and pedestrian improvements, I always like it when people make a quantitative ask, because at least it gives you something that's not just generalized. And he says, at least one long-term bike parking space should be required for every bed in new residential construction, and that one bike spot for every 3 units isn't sufficient, and that long-term bike parking spaces should be required for all of the office and employment uses. So I'd be interested in seeing if this WEP could be a little bit more quantitative and maybe a little more proactive about creating bike spots. I'm a biker and I go downtown and I'm still locking my bike to a pole sometimes. There's not really, I mean, it exists and I know where to go if I really want to park my bike in a city provided space, but I'm, you know, like a lot of people, I lock it to a trash can or a fence rail or whatever happens to be closest to the thing that I'm going to on that day. And then just the pedestrian focused frontages should be required more broadly, and I think that's already being met. I mean, I think it's Commissioner Lazar always, you know, has brought this up many times, that we didn't used to get to see the bay because of all the warehousing in the industry. So I think we're meeting that, you know, already. But I wouldn't want to see a bunch of low income housing block the view too much, and we go back to how it used to be, but now it's just housing instead of warehouses. All right, there's this whole 37 pages or 37 comments here that I've been through, but I'll yield to another commissioner at this point. But those are my general comments on this. But it's a really great document. Thank you. Any other commissioners like to make preliminary comments on this?
Yeah, I reserve my right to make additional comments, but I'll start with some of the more bite-sized things. And I always forget to try not to bury the lead, which is, I like the document. I like the public process that's been undertaken so far. That's nice to see and gives me a lot of comfort as we embark on further down this road. I think Commissioner Benson already mentioned it. The comments from Bruce for the trails, I think it is a big hole in the document that we don't reference the Great Redwood Trail. That's an inevitability as far as I'm concerned, so we should be making sure to account for it. And it will have a profound effect on portions of the planning area. We don't know exactly how it'll materialize, but it will at some point. I guess I have questions about Chapter 6, which is, I guess I'll start by just saying it's explained early in the plan that this is sort of, if I understand it correctly, and I'll admit I've never worked on a specific plan, this is sort of a policy document like a general plan, but it's also a regulatory document like a zoning ordinance. So it's a combined all-in-one thing. Okay. So having said that, it seems like Chapter 6 is where all the zoning type of stuff lives, right? And I guess I wanted to see if I have a good understanding of what is in the current draft so far as big chunks of what those regulatory things would be. So there's a series of tables. Let me just take a look here. So there's, I guess I'll start with perhaps the biggest is the descriptions of the individual zoning districts that will emerge as a result of this, and kind of the sort of underpinnings of the philosophy behind each. Then there's the allowed uses. That's pretty easy to wrap your head around, and I think a theme in the document is trying to remove discretionary permitting from uses that you want to promote, like housing in certain situations, meeting certain performance standards. But in addition to Table 6.1, there's Table 6.2, which will specify the floor area ratio and setbacks and things of that nature, right? And then there's 6.3, which is a little more. That's where we get into bicycle related requirements that they don't exist currently in the zoning code, or do they already in some form? Is that a new thing?
In the inland zone, but it might be a little more intense than the inland zoning code right now.
Okay.
The requirements.
So that would be a place where you could hang some of what you were talking about. Well, I guess someone was just talking about parking and having, yeah, that was Colin, but yeah, okay. All right, and then there's the landscaping requirements, coastal hazard standards. Sorry, okay. And then there was another table, I thought, 6. Oh, maybe that was it. Oh, and there, I think there's there's some figures that talk about pedestrian. Is that kind of like the universe of the regulations at a kind of big chunk level, or is there another chunk I'm missing there? Just trying to wrap my head around that part.
Yeah, and the various regulations. If you're an old town, you can't have street-facing residences on the ground floor unless it's associated with like a really large redevelop or residential project, or like in the commercial bayfront, because of sea level rise, we're just not allowing, at least right now, it doesn't allow any residences on the first floor at all. That way it addresses some sea level rise issues. And then like splitting up the commercial bayfront to really focus more on in the east side of the bay, the northeast side, to promote more of the retreat and the open space and the temporary uses, where focus most of the development and intensity in the commercial bayfront where the boardwalk is. So that's kind of what we heard. And then a little happy medium in the central part. That's why we split that up. So really we separated between upper floors, street facing, and non-street facing. So you could have like a non-street facing ground floor in Old Town, right? But if it's street facing, we want it to be visitor serving, which is also a requirement of the Coastal Act too. But you.
Okay, well, yeah, and I didn't expect to have nailed it. I just wanted to make sure I grasped the big point.
And made a lot of uses that we wanted principally permitted.
Right. Yeah. Now, there's 5 guiding principles, is that correct? A, B, C, D, and E?
Yes, from the beginning, chapter 1.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I noticed that I don't know where to hang bicycle or pedestrian multimodal goals on those guiding principles. Increasing housing options is principle A. Safe destination, vibrant for residents and tourists is B. Expand access and strengthen connection to Humboldt Bay. That doesn't quite work for me. That's C. Prepare for and adapt to sea level rise is D. And E is foster a diverse and robust business community. So do you see a place to kind of put in this document those types of goals, or are they kind of ancillary to the overall?
Yeah, purpose? So the good question, the guiding principles at the beginning were what guided the goals in chapter 5. So really we should probably add the bike parking to one of the goals and policies in chapter 5, which were created from the guiding principles, which were created from the vision of the area, included in the 2040 general plan, included in the RFP, as well as from the public. So I think in the goals in chapter 5, there is, a vibrant and safe destination for residents, tourists, and businesses in the arts. And then under that could have a policy about biking, although I think maybe there is one. Let's see. We do have promote multimodal, so it's WEP policy 2.3, promote multimodal transportation options in complete streets, which accommodate walking, biking, driving, and using public transit, such as exploring the feasibility of converting some streets in Old Town to one-off streets and providing amenities that make multimodal transportation safer and more pleasant. And then that could be modified to focus more on biking for all ages, safety or something. And then I can really go through this fine-tooth comb and see if there's somewhere else that it could go.
Yeah, I just wasn't really sure where to hang it, and it did seem like in the workshop I participated in to be at least a subject of discussion amongst some of the people in my breakout group. And certainly, obviously, CRTP, and it's not just about cycling, too. It's really all alternative forms of transportation. And bicycling will be e-bikes more and more, too, as we move into the future. So yeah, I would just reiterate that, I think the trail component of the Great Redwood Trail and the Waterfront Trail, I know the Waterfront Trail is spoken to. I also take the points of Bruce about the kind of clunkiness of the segments between, around the around the mill, I guess. I'm trying to think of, what is it, the big logs, I know, I should know it. The building, Schmidbauer. The areas around Schmidbauer is where it starts to get real wonky.
Except that's out of the plan area.
I know, but that's an example of the sort of disconnectedness of infrastructure that we're going to be facing when we're trying to synthesize it with the right-of-way and the street traffic, and how do you balance that in a way that doesn't create kind of a strange experience for those on the trail, because it really is not an ideal experience once you hit that section. But we're doing what we can. So yeah, I think not having that kind of worked out, we don't have to have a this is a kind of policy high level document, but at the same time, visioning that I think is appropriate, especially given the area it covers and its sections of the trail that are not yet in place. So those are my initial comments. I'll stop there for now.
For the most part, I'm going to just follow along here. I'm learning this part of this, but I do have one question that would really help me understand the graphics and the sea level rise that we're planning for here. All of the scenarios are based on 6.5 feet plus, king tide, storm, that kind of thing. What is the 6.5 based on? What likelihood in what year?
I believe we talk about that in the background report. There's I don't know it off the top of my head, but
did anybody catch that?
It's 2100. We're planning for 2100.
2100 at 80% likelihood, 50% likelihood.
6 feet is the medium high risk aversion. So it's like that I believe is a 0.5% chance. It's not. It's a conservative.
It's okay. That's the important answer. It's a conservative look. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I also have not spent as much time with this document as I could have. So I mostly just have some questions for staff. The first one, I'll just kind of run through them in order of appearance. The first one is about the section on Wiyot history. Has that language been shared with the tribes? Has it been vetted by the tribes yet?
I can't remember because I think we did that so long ago. we definitely sent out our AB 52 or SB, whatever it is, for the consultation.
SB 18, I think.
Yeah. Bear River Band, we are supposed to meet with the TIPO very soon because we wanted to also make sure we had the document. I haven't heard anything from the WIA but I believe that language was taken from our marketing firm that helped write it. That was at the beginning of our RFP that was vetted through them, but I can make sure that it's pointed out.
Yeah, I would maybe just recommend resending the draft to, various members of the tribal government and tribal council. Ted Hernandez might be a good point of contact. I'm sure you have all their information.
Yeah.
And the Blue Lake Rancher.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All three of them. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But particularly since the Wiyot Cultural Center is, in the heart of the district, it'd be good to ask them how they want to be represented. But yeah, I agree. All three. And then in the allowed uses, I have been, hearing rumblings from, the Ink People, Center for the Arts. Maybe there are other organizations too interested in, like an arts center, a cultural center. I'm wondering if that was to come to fruition within this plan area, how it would be categorized, and if that's something that we could ensure would have a pretty streamlined pathway in all of the zones, or all the zones where it seemed appropriate.
Yeah, I think like museums and cultural centers would fall under civic institutions, and they're principally permitted in every zone district.
Okay, fantastic.
And then we also specifically added in work-live units, which can support artist housing, which is principally permitted as well. I mean, most housing is, but the work-live was really big. Like, it's its own thing to help promote that.
Great. Just to kind of riff off of Commissioner Benson's comments about housing being forefront, and that maybe not being necessarily a clearly articulated community priority in the engagement. I think, part of that is probably tied to the funding, because I think it was funded through SB2 funds, which is specifically for the creation of housing.
And LEAP. Yep.
Right. So for the granting agency, the Housing and Community Development Department, that's something that they'll be looking for specifically when they look at this document when it's adopted. Okay, a couple of just questions. Could you kind of run us through the RV section? Sorry, these are kind of specific, but what's kind of the intent
Under
of
the
this section?
temporary uses and structures. Let's see. Okay. RV, camper home, camper. So you can have one if you have a active building permit, right?
I'm just going to interrupt.
Okay.
Though. I feel like this is just copied out of our inland zoning code for temporary use provisions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
yeah, I know that
forget why it was added here, because normally we just are referring to the zoning code.
Right. I know that there had been some talk about like a new RV campground, near the bridge. I was wondering if there was some like intent with this section to make it easier or to regulate RVs in a particular way, but it sounds like it's not. There's no specific vision for RVs. No specific RV vision. Okay, well then.
This section's on temporary RVs as a temporary use, whereas recreational vehicle parks as a primary permanent use are in the table.
Yes.
Okay. And then just, it looks like from the key development standards table, like we're looking at some pretty built out parcels, like zero setbacks, and pretty high floor area ratios, which, I'm super supportive of. I have no issue with that. But in terms of fire safety, I'm seeing for accessory dwelling units, there's a specific call out for, whatever's sufficient as determined by the building official. But there isn't, a call out like that for any of the other setbacks. I don't know if that is necessary or not. Maybe it isn't, but just something I was thinking about. If you have zero setbacks for fire separation.
Right. I think the intention of that is it would be a new building, right? And they definitely would have to meet the building code, which would have fire suppression. I think the ADU language, it came in because did require a setback between them, not a zero. So just letting people know, hey, even though there's a required setback, you may need to have fire protection, meet fire standards, whereas if you're at a 0 to 0 and you're right next to each other, you definitely will have to have like those fire rated walls.
And then on that table as well, it looks like there's an interesting carve out for minimum stories. In a couple districts, you can potentially rebuild to lower than 2 stories if you can kind of prove what's been there in the past. Can you explain that one a little bit?
Yeah, we are just trying to, just like they did in the inland zoning code for the downtown and downtown west, really just trying to promote that intensity, increasing it to make sure we are redeveloping at higher intensities and densities. Since we can't go out, we can only go up. So we don't want people building new, single story homes or buildings. We want more intensity to concentrate it in these areas because we can't spread out. So it's kind of forcing people to think about it more.
Okay, yeah. I guess I read it as like you could maybe go lower than the set minimum if you could prove it had been lower.
Right, but I think it's within like 6 months or something. Let me see if I can find the standard here.
So the standard as it reads could potentially result in a lower height, lower density than would otherwise have been intended.
Yeah, I don't think that was our intent.
No,
so we'll fix this.
Footnote 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Because it kind of I would like to see that minimum stay in there. Because I agree. I think we should be very careful with developing these sites pretty intensely.
Would we want to put like a time limit, or maybe like it? I think maybe this intention of this was, homes that are on like the local register or something. Like if it's burned to the ground and it was a single story, then we would allow them to do it again. But
yeah, maybe
we can be more specific about it then.
Yeah, we'll get a little more specific.
If you're like rebuilding a historic structure, I could see that.
Just before we move on, isn't there sections of the code that kind of provide a carve out, like a time period for reconstruction or something gets damaged?
Yeah, the nonconformity section of our inland and coastal code talk about that. So I think we can just refer to that.
Something similar.
Yeah, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Okay, and then you had mentioned, Caitlin, something about the treatment of unlisted historic structures, and I was wondering if you could just like point me to where it speaks to that in the design guidelines section or wherever, and how we would identify and treat properties that haven't been captured in the past, because that makes me a little squirmy, thinking about how that could roll out, just in terms of someone coming forward, and not being listed yet and then being subject to standards they didn't know about.
So there's the local register properties, and then there's historic properties that aren't on the local register, and then there's going to be new buildings that are going to be nestled in with local register or historic properties that aren't on the local register. So the guidelines are really like, there is design standard, and the only one right now in there is to make sure your mechanical equipment is screened so it's not ugly. And then we did also reference to the certified IP. So right now it would just be the ugly, inharmonious, monotonous, kind of really subjective design findings we have to make in the coastal zone. And then we're anticipating the coastal zoning code to kind of match the inland, where there are objective design standards, where you have to have a certain number of architectural features that are objective, and not as subjective as what the coastal is now. So the new buildings would have that. And then there's these guidelines. So that's why we were calling them guidelines and not requirements, because it is sticky. So if you did have the the key kicker to the guidelines is if you have another discretionary permit that you need, we're going to look, you have to be consistent with a specific plan. So if you are getting a design review permit or a conditional use permit, we have in that section, right, it's consistent with the general plan, it's consistent with the zoning code, it's specific with adopted specific plan. Right now we don't have one, so we don't do that analysis, but it'll say, we'll say whether, you know, this new building does meet, has some of these characteristics from the design guidelines, or we'll say it doesn't, right? And then we can make a recommendation based on those guidelines.
And just some additional background on that, there's this Housing Crisis Act that was passed by the state that prohibits us from adopting new subjective design standards. So we either have to adopt objective design standards, like you can't have a 10-foot by 10-foot blank wall, you know, that's objective, or we have to adopt subjective guidelines that are not enforceable standards. They're just guidance that people can take or leave.
Yeah. And so we're hoping people will see it and be like, okay, well, we want to impress the community, so we better do some of these guidelines. I was going to say something else too.
While you're thinking about it,
I did remember. These guidelines also were basically paraphrased down from the core area design guidelines that were created, I think, in like in the 90s. Yeah, so it's something the community's already cared about for a long time. So we're just putting it somewhere now to remind people that they're there and we have them.
Would they, I guess I'm not clear on, like, would there still be a design review hearing associated with these? Like, would the design review committee or would the planning commission have to make findings based on these, like, should do's? Or like, how are they vetted?
I mean, it's a guideline, so we could say, yeah, we'll have to make findings that's consistent with the specific plan. And if it's a guideline, you can say, well, it may not be consistent, but it's a guideline. So, and then, or staff can work with the developer and be like, hey, why don't you just do a little bit of this? Because we do that already with our design review. We kind of negotiate with them to get more architectural features that are in line with
the question of design review, though. Our inland code currently requires design review for new buildings or additions of 30% or more on existing buildings, not for single family homes, but for multifamily housing and commercial. And we're bringing forth a code update next planning commission meeting, and proposing to remove multifamily from the subjective design review to get us more points on our pro-housing designation application to HCD, and because it's just the way things are going towards objective standards for housing versus subjective review by an appointed commission of their aesthetics. And so we definitely are looking at our objective design standards and trying to bolster those, thinking forward to when we will not be doing subjective design review of multifamily housing anymore.
I guess just on that, before we move along, I would think like a place like Pasadena would be a good example of someone who's trying to like hold fast to some protections for historical structures and design elements that are important while still contending with the pressure that's emerging from HCD to allow housing to emerge. So I would think there might be some opportunities for plagiarism or whatever there. And then I guess the other part that always is a concern to me is that unlisted structures aren't afforded the same protection under the code. And so, we had an item on the agenda just tonight, we all like the Sorrel Healing Center, but the architect or the archaeological consultant determined that it was eligible for recognition as a colonial home. So there are other structures within the jurisdiction that will qualify but have not been put on the register, most notable being the Carson Mansion. And so in the library section of our waterfront plan, I think, I don't think we have to build a lot into the plan to cover that kind of anomaly, but we should at least not lose sight of that being something that deserves treatment. And it will probably need to be an objective standard applied across the both listed and unlisted properties would be my.
That's where I was actually going next, is like in this, and this is my last thing, in this design guidelines section, there's this section B, renovation of historic buildings, and then it says refer to the Secretary of Interior standards for the alteration and demolition of all structures of historic significance. Which, and the section before it specifically says, refer to Muni Code, historic preservation for alteration and demolition of all structures on the local register of historic places. So this is clearly meant to apply for anything of historic significance, even if it's unlisted. So I have some questions about like, well, how would that be flagged by staff? Is it pretty subjective, or is there some other kind of guidance, that maybe could be adopted with this plan about like, here are some unlisted things that we want to continue to regulate, just so it's a little bit more structured. And so that's just a suggestion, I guess. Maybe think about that a little bit. And then, but for the Carson Mansion, it's unlisted. They don't want it listed, but say they come in and they want to put on another banquet hall, another addition that's just like not necessarily in keeping with the Secretary of Interior standards. Not, I'll just say that. It looks like they would maybe be subject to some guidelines, but it doesn't seem like this would actually create much more of a regulatory burden at all. Okay. I was just kind of curious. So basically we could say, as staff, we consider this to be a structure of historic significance. The guidelines suggest that you do X, Y, and Z, and that's where this conversation starts and ends.
Yeah, but we could also look into doing objective design standards around that issue if you want something that's not just a guideline.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn. I'm not necessarily suggesting that that it would be a good idea. It might be a rabbit hole, but it might, it might be interesting if it's not too large of an ask of staff to, have the next iteration of the plan come back before us with a short list of anything that's unlisted that would be likely to be considered of historic significance, and, any suggestions for objective standards that could be kind of low-hanging fruit.
Be like a short list of historic properties that we already know about.
Yeah, like the Carson Mansion would be one. I mean, I'm imagining it would be like 10 properties or less.
I guess it would just be anything in the green book that's not on the local register.
Yeah, it might be helpful just to like have a really short slide deck being like, here's the 10 sites. Like, does this seem to rise to a level of significance where we should have a broader conversation, or like talk to the Historic Preservation Commission, or, do anything else, or should we just leave it here? For now. But I would be curious to hear what other commissioners think. I'm not attached to the idea.
I mean, you could always start with the National Register nomination paperwork. Kathleen Stanton put that together, has buildings within that package that are identified. That would obviously be the highest level of recognition. The Green Book is a good backstop for things that might not have made the cut but are still locally significant, but it also doesn't include everything. There are blind spots, and but once you look at the two of those, you might have most of the properties covered. I would think there might not be much left.
Another thing I was thinking is if we could have more code incentives for historic properties that are on the local register to encourage others to join the register, if there was some more regulatory benefits to being on the register.
Yeah, no parking, or like you're not subject to our new short stay vacation rental cap or whatever. It might be worth creating a new appendix that just outlines what those sites are that are in the green book that aren't currently on the register, and then having that act like just say this explicitly, this is staff's guidance when determining what structures should be subject to these additional guidelines. That way it's transparent, and staff doesn't have to be at the counter being like, let me talk to the director about whether or not these should apply to you, because people don't like that.
Yeah.
And that's everything that I had so far. Thank you.
It's lovely how between all the commissioners we have areas of interest and expertise, so more comes to the table. Go ahead, Michael.
I do have one thing that Commissioner Freitas sparked for me, and it's been a week or two since I read this document. I irresponsibly went on vacation. Do we call out anywhere the arts district, the cultural arts district in this plan?
I made sure that we did.
Yeah, I know it's a
Okay.
policy, I believe, to promote it.
Might be interesting to add a map that shows the overlay of that district with these zones,
Great idea.
with all the leaning into art and live work and
Yeah.
in people's interests and others. I think that would be a good addition.
Good one. Okay, I know you wanted us to receive the report and provide you with comments. Do you also want to hear from the public, or are we obligated? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I know I see Colin Fisk has waited a long time. I don't know if he's still there.
He is.
And his hand's up. So Colin, we're going to open the floor to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, and good evening, commissioners. Colin Fisk with CRTP. I wanted to start off by saying just thanks to staff and the consultants for all their work on this, and also thank you, commissioners, for your work and for considering CRTP's written comments. CRTP is generally very supportive of the plan and the direction, towards encouraging more walkable infill housing in this area. I wanted to address just a few of the kind of high-level issues. One, around the issue of getting rid of the minimum parking mandates, just to say that that's not really such a radical proposal anymore. I would say it's even the direction that the planning profession is going. There are hundreds of communities of all sizes across the country that have already eliminated these mandates, and more every day. So it's not sort of an untested thing. It's coming out of folks realizing that there was not much of a scientific basis for them in the beginning, and they are in many ways quite counterproductive. So I think an important way of thinking about this is to say that in the past, parking has often been equated with access, but that's really a false equivalency. Parking is a type of access for vehicles. It's not access for people necessarily. And we have to acknowledge that there are other modes of access, including public transit, walking, biking, rolling, and that these are only going to become more important. And particularly in the waterfront area, with the Earth Center coming on, other planned infrastructure improvements and developments, this will become more and more of an area that's accessed in a variety of ways. And so we just think it's really important to commit to investing in these more climate-friendly, more people-friendly modes of transportation, rather than having a plan which plans for investing in more parking infrastructure at some point, and instead to just manage the public parking supply through the metering programs that have been discussed, and manage the private parking supply through unbundling from rents. Also on that theme of access, just that it's really important to acknowledge that access needs to be for people of all ages and abilities and incomes, and that means safe and equitable infrastructure, particularly for people walking and biking. And so, on that note, we mentioned Class 4 bikeways in our comments. I also want to explicitly express our support for the Humboldt Trails Council comments about the Great Redwood Trail and the importance of having a complete build out of that trail in a way that supports all users through this area. Also want to mention, we really do think it's important providing enough residential density is critical to have high quality transit support as well as walkability and bikeability. And so encourage you to take another look maybe at some of the step backs and setbacks, and perhaps increase some of the minimum densities in the core area. Use things like build two lines to ensure that there's a healthy pedestrian zone. And also to perhaps look at the ability to allow greater flexibility in ground floor uses in order to ensure that projects are actually feasible and we can produce some housing, as long as there are objective design standards that ensure a healthy pedestrian zone regardless of the ground floor use.
Mr. Fisk, your time is up.
Okay, great, thank you.
But I thank you for your comments. The commission thanks you for your comments, and especially the time that you take to review these documents, and the written comments that you give us are always worthy. Thank you. Anyone else from the general public? I don't think I see anybody there, and there's no one in the house, so I think we're at a stopping point for. Okay, yeah. So back to Commissioner Freitas. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'll keep it really fast. So if we were to consider reducing or eliminating parking requirements entirely, that would be something like, could we sort of leave a breadcrumb in this document and then it has to go into the IP? Is that the idea?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I mean, I am just one commissioner. I personally would be supportive of that. I think some of that policy language is already in there, about balancing the need for parking with moving it in a more, dense and active direction. But would the commission be interested in providing direction to staff on that now, or would we want to wait till the next draft to come out?
When would it be most useful to staff for us to give you input on that?
I've been tracking Coastal Commission action, and I have a list of actions they've taken on parking standards that I have not researched yet. So I'd like to look at that and see what their findings were and what they've certified and come back to you.
Yeah, because I think that's the difficult thing, is that we could voice a support of that, and I think we should. But the Coastal Commission ultimately is really jazzed on coastal access, including parking. So that being said, I would be very interested to have a report back on that, and kind of move in the direction of as little parking as feasible. Not to say that it couldn't be provided, but just to say the city wouldn't mandate it and would leave it up to developers to choose what to provide for whatever they put forward. I think that's a great direction. And the final thing I wanted to say that I forgot to say earlier is I really appreciate the way public comment was compiled for us, and how it had a column for this is something I like, or this is something I would like to change. I thought that was really easy to read, and the public participation throughout this whole process has been really excellent, and very much right-sized. So congratulations to staff and to DUDEC for doing such a good job on that. Thank you.
Okay. Or one more comment?
Yeah, I did reserve the right to.
Yep, yes, you did. Go ahead.
Not that I wanted to get into too
I'm
much.
usually the one long-winded, so I'm not about to hold you back.
All right. Well, I guess I would just say, to piggyback off of the discussion about parking, I'm sympathetic to CRTP's arguments, but I also am wary as well. I think just a thought, when you look into this, Director Kenyon, but maybe if you marry the sort of relaxation or waiver of parking to priority uses, that maybe that's the kind of thing that might be a good cocktail in terms of the Coastal Commission's comfort level. When you have something like a visitor serving facility, a public access, facility, something that meets the philosophical underpinnings of the Coastal Act, that if you want to get that objective, you got to give something in return. That might not be such a bad combination. Also, the one thing that comes to mind if we waive parking is that we don't have as much in our toolbox for redevelopment projects that otherwise, are good projects, but we don't get to find a way to incentivize them or benefit them, like a historical building that gets adapted to a new use. You know, once you've given everybody a pass on parking, you don't have anything left on that front. So, and I'm always trying to think of ways that we can incentivize historic preservation and the investment that it requires. And it's a hard thing to do. It's often an unfunded mandate. And I do think that Mr. Fisk's comments about density are somewhat curious about the idea of why set a cap, why not set a target, and then we have the units that we need to achieve based on our RENA numbers, so that's kind of a backstop of sorts, and then that wouldn't stymie the potential for something more ambitious in the future. If we don't, if we set that ceiling now, and there may be plenty of good reasons to keep a ceiling, but that is sort of conventional planning, like, oh God, we can't have more than this, or the whole thing blows up or whatever. So I don't know. I certainly don't think HCD would have a problem with that, but yeah, I'd be interested in investigating that. I don't know how the other commissioners feel about that.
I'd just like to point out our general plan has maximum FARs in it. So if we were going to remove that, it might affect the general plan. And the general plan EIR, analyzed our capacity with build out. And that's where it's helpful to have an understanding of maximums so that you can say, okay, well, this could be the maximum potential development. Do we have enough water and sewer to serve it in your environmental document analysis? But it just covers FAR, so we could allow greater heights or make sure we're hitting that maximum FAR that's in our general plan. We can take a look at where we could increase density.
And I think that kind of reminds me of another thing that I wanted to confirm, which was it seemed like in the staff report it talked about the expected environmental review as an addendum to the EIR, right? So theoretically, before we make a recommendation, the council will be reviewing an addendum, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
the time frame for
and you
the
too. We have a draft right now. I'm trying to get through it.
I mean, we have a draft document, so it doesn't seem like it's prime time.
It's definitely going to be attached to the, by all means, when we take it forward for public hearing, but I can see if there's a way to provide it to you guys beforehand. We just didn't want to muddle this process up with that. But
we could post it with the document online when we're ready.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
And I take your point, Director Kenyon, about how much coverage we have under our programmatic document for the general plan EIR. We are doing a specific plan, and I guess consistency works both ways. So you can't shoot below and you can't shoot above, but it does seem like we're having another bite of the apple, and I guess my question would be, like, at what point do we invite a challenge from having an adequate analysis as the underpinnings for it? It might be very quickly once you go over the FAR, but I'm not accustomed to having that, be a trigger point, I guess.
I mean, it would be great if we had more funding and we could just tear off of the program EIR and do a full EIR with this, and then really we could get all the projects through clear, but there just is not they're so expensive. We just didn't have enough money for it.
It wouldn't actually be as great as you think it would be. You don't want to do that.
I just know that under the state's statute that if you adopt a specific plan under an EIR, then all future projects consistent with it are covered under that EIR, and we can not have to do any more. Well, right now we're doing the CEQA stream work plan to kind of take the guesswork out for future projects, to be like, hey, there's these, we know about a lot of the exemptions, but for areas that you can't be exempt, taking the guesswork out, like, okay, you're located over here, you're going to be expected to have like these additional documents to get through your environmental.
15183, is projects consistent with a community plan or zoning. I mean, that would seem to be applicable once this is in place.
Hopefully that's in there then in our draft.
Well, it's in CEQA, so I can't remember what class, but Okay, well, I think that's enough for now. But yeah, I am sympathetic to the, trying to not, and I do like Colin's comments about being more as flexible as possible with downstairs uses. It seems perfectly logical to me, as long as we achieve our goals in terms of housing, that we preserve that flexibility. So that's all for now, I think.
Okay, commissioners and staff, thank you for all that input and the opportunity to comment on the web. So this takes us to item H3, and if you all remember our last meeting, I threw a little bit of a coup. Okay, it was a 10-year-old fit that I didn't want to vote yes on any more vacation rental, without there being some kind of strategic objective. And then Commissioner Kraft was so kind to make sure that it got onto tonight's agenda. But before we launch into that, I just want to do a check-in. It's 8 o'clock. It's not that we never work past 8, but it is 8 o'clock. This isn't, this is something we could discuss later. I know that we're going to have one more report from Director Kenyon before we adjourn tonight. I just want to check in with commissioners. Is this our night for this, or if you had we have 2 items on next agenda so far, we could put this off a month, or are you all ready for it?
I will say this: it'd be nice if we were all here for it. That's one.
Yeah.
One I mean, it's not the end of the world, but I think Meredith would enjoy this just as much as all the rest of us. So.
I think so.
I'm good either way. I would love to have the conversation, if we do it next time, ahead of any vacation rental decisions, any projects on the list. So earlier in the agenda, if there are some. And maybe I'm conflating this a little bit too much, but it just seems like we keep begging for policy and broader thinking and then making decisions case by case.
Yeah, I guess, first of all, I would not have categorized your request as a 10-year-old fit, but I thought that was funny. Yeah, it's good to tease oneself. I'm kind of torn. I'm pretty tired, and I know that the commission, felt pretty passionately about this, and wanted to take it pretty seriously and think pretty creatively about it. I don't think I would be able to do that very well tonight. I'm also assuming the city manager has stayed with us this long to be part of this conversation. So I'm curious to know from staff what the scope of what you're bringing tonight would entail. If it's just a brief 5-minute report, that would be different than opening a larger conversation. I think the commission would be interested in a larger conversation, but I'm not sure that's what is planned for tonight.
The report ends in a recommendation to form a subcommittee to, draft a written recommendation and then present that to city council.
TLDR. Okay.
So that's but I also have a bunch of slides about how we regulate vacation rentals now, what our numbers are, and what other cities are doing. So the presentation could be 1 slide or 10, depending on what you are interested in.
Yeah, for me, I feel like I understand how we make it possible for people to have short-term rentals already. I am probably, rather than just reviewing that, for me, I'm more interested in looking at what some other cities are doing strategically to meet strategic objectives around, balancing long-term rentals and short-term rentals, and making sure that that people are paying their tax, and that they're taxed, and and then of course minimizing the public safety risks and so on and so forth. But I'm looking to get to some. I have to say that I did a certain amount of research, and I didn't find any city who gave me a numeric on here's the short-term rentals versus long-term rentals, and we think it should be X percent. I did see a lot of stuff around when vacation rentals go up 1%, housing prices go up 3.6%. I saw a lot of correlations, but nothing really solid quantitatively. So I'd be really interested in seeing some models from how some other municipalities have done it. Doesn't have to be tonight for me, but the sooner the better. I agree with Commissioner Kraft before we vote on more of these. And I know that we're not going to create a policy in one discussion, but I think even airing it would provide us would provide me specifically more direction on how to vote on these things, and to feel that we're on a strategic path would embolden me to be more proactive and not just dig my heels in about wanting to approve these things.
So I'm thinking the right thing to do is put it on the agenda early for next time.
Could we request it be listed first on the agenda under old business?
I would recommend that we put it after projects that have applicants, just to be polite.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it could be moved ahead of if any vacation rentals come on the agenda. The chair could do that at
Good to know. Yeah. So I'm going to make this I don't think we need a motion, but that we table this.
I feel like
maybe the city manager has something to say.
I was about to say something.
I'm sorry, I did want to say something. I'm fine with whatever direction the planning commission wants to go, obviously, but I do want to make it clear that policy is set by council, and regardless of whether it's heard tonight or whether it's heard next month or 2 months or 3 months from now, it'll likely be staff's recommendation that there's a subcommittee that makes a recommendation to council to set some sort of policy. And in regards to Commissioner Benson's comments, this has been a very long process that we've been going through. We've been tracking short-term rentals for well over 3 years now, and we have an idea of where they're going, and we're trying to get them into compliance. And this has been a long-term plan for staff to not only get an understanding and a holding of that, and also to take the funding that we get from this to put into the housing trust fund that we have and make sure that everybody's compliant. So even if we got to the point of where there was some subcommittee that tried to establish some sort of policy, until we have our handle on what's going on, because we vary anywhere between 130 to 150 VRBOs that we have within the community, we don't know whether or not any of those are still going to be compliant once we go through the process. So we could have 150, let's say, and then we go through the building process and we find out that 30 or 40 of those aren't compliant. They'll no longer be able to operate. So I think we're a little bit early to this. I think it's a good idea to understand what the policy may be when we get to that point, but we don't know where we're at right now because we're still in the middle of like getting people in compliance, making sure that they're registered, making sure that they're doing the right things, and making sure that they can actually be a VRBO. So I just want to be clear that when staff makes a recommendation, it will be exactly what Director Kenyon said, that there would be a subcommittee to look at all of these things. But until we have all of that information, it's going to be difficult for that subcommittee to make an informed decision.
Thank you, Miles. I appreciate that, and I understand that. Yeah, we know that we don't make policy here, but we do want to be guided by it, and we do want to have input into it. That's all we're asking.
Yeah, and in terms of if we're going to have this at the next meeting, I think what I'd like to hear a little bit more about, besides the 3 to 5 years of implementing the short-term rental regs that we have in place, is really the breadcrumbs in the ordinance itself that talk about a cap are not there because it was arbitrarily put in. There was a discussion that surrounded that when this was initially set by the council. And I'd like to know more about what the expectation and kind of concerns that is a relic from. Because I think what we're seeing is in implementing the regulations and having the things come to us on appeal, we're hearing the frustration from people in certain parts of the city that feel like we've already exceeded the carrying capacity in their neighborhood. And that cap isn't a perfect way to handle it on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. It's an arbitrary kind of concept. It doesn't have more nuance to it. So even though we are early, as City Manager Slattery pointed out, in implementing all this, we're quickly confronting that in some cases we have a large concentration, and we're struggling as a body to deal with that. So I would like to hear more about that when we have this presented the next time. So
100%, that is perfect.
I just want to say, I may have misinterpreted you, Commissioner Lazar, but we do not have a cap, and we've never had a cap.
Just to be clear, Miles, I mean in the ordinance it provides that ability to set a cap. That's all I'm talking about.
Okay, just checking.
Okay, well, we'll table that until the rest of the continuance of that discussion until next one. So let's move to item I, Director's Reports and Communications. Director Kenyon, you have something.
Sure, yeah. I'm reading from an email from Lisa Savage. This is to report back on something that happened last agenda. Staff contacted Pacific Outfitters last month following the Planning Commission meeting regarding the Myrtle Avenue street vacation and surplus property. The Planning Commission had asked if Pacific Outfitters would agree to continue to allow community groups to use their parking lot for community fundraisers such as car washes, and if Pacific Outfitters would be interested in allowing the city to install a sign for Cooper Gulch Park on their grassy lot on the corner of 5th and Myrtle. Pacific Outfitters readily agreed to both requests.
Thank you.
And then the second thing I wanted to mention is a man by the name of Dan Burden, who's a bike ped advocate, is coming to Humboldt Bay area starting Saturday, July 22nd through Tuesday or Wednesday. I forget when exactly he's leaving, but it's being sponsored in part by HCOG, and the county is leading the effort, but Arcata and Eureka and the county are all going to do walk audits with him and then have discussions afterwards. And the walk audit for Eureka is tentatively scheduled for Sunday, July 23rd, 11 to 1. And it's going to be of the First Street Waterfront Drive area from C to the Adorney Center that we received comments about. And then tentatively, he's going to be doing a presentation for the community at the Warfinger on Monday, so the 24th of July at 5:30, or doors would open at 5:30 and the talk would start at 6. So we'll have more media about that as we firm up those times, and just wanted to put that on everybody's radar. And that was it for my director report.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any other reports and communications from staff or commissioners? Okay, we are adjourned.